There are things that tenants are allowed to pay, and thankfully rent is one of them. When they did the first piece of legislation about this tenant fee ban, they forgot to put rent on the list. So rent and utility bills are allowed to be paid by tenants. These are the big things for you guys, okay? The tenancy deposit is capped now at 5 weeks. Any let-only landlords that are holding a deposit in excess of 5 weeks, listen to what I'm going to say shortly in relation to that. If you take a holding deposit, then that is also capped at 1 week. Now, as agents, we've always took holding deposits on your behalf. And the reason for that is because we're going to ask you to stop marketing your property for 2 to 3 weeks while we reference this tenant and get the property ready. We've always taken a fee to show financial commitment so that they don't go and look at something else. That's now capped at 1 week. In our area, our rents are not very high. In some cases, as low as £350, it's 75 quid. We have seen a huge increase in failed applications in terms of people changing their mind and going elsewhere because the financial commitment that we restrain to now is just not big enough. So if you as a landlord are experiencing a higher fall through rate with your agent, it's not their fault, it's most likely this. And they can also pay specific default fees. One of the things I'm very pleased about, which is a default fee, is an early termination fee. Okay, so anybody that rents a property to a tenant, let's say on a year's contract, they move in January, March, their circumstances change, they want to leave. They're legally bound to that contract until next January. They're in a 12-month contract that states they must pay you the rent. However, it's so difficult, or it's not difficult, it's just very costly to enforce that. So if you've got a tenant that says, for example, I'm going home I'm moving back to London. I've got another job down in London, I'm relocating. There's really no point you fighting out the next 9 months of rent because they're going to up and leave anyway and leave you in the lurch. You're then going to be fighting back for possession of your property because you've been so difficult, they've took the keys with them and they've not given them you back. So you've got to go through the court proceedings. So I'm not saying that contracts are worthless, but unfortunately in our industry, it's so costly to pursue a tenant for breach of contract and not always financially viable for you to do so. So this now clearly states within the Tenant Fees Act that if a tenant wants to break a contract early, the landlord is not to withhold reasonable consent. But the tenant is liable for the rent until a new tenant is found, on the proviso, of course, that you're marketing the property. You can't just say, yeah, rent until a tenant's found and not market it. And also, they can cover your reasonable reletting costs. So for those that use agents, your agent will charge you another charge because we have to do the whole setup again. It is expected that the tenant can pay your reasonable setup fee to find a new tenant because they are in breach of the contract. So that's one good thing that the tenant fee ban put in because it's clear. If ever we have to take it to a deposit dispute, we will win on that basis. It's in a piece of legislation and we will be able to achieve that for you. The idea of that is putting you in a position whereby you're not experiencing any loss by the tenant not completing the contract. Now, you can charge for a change of sharer and you can charge if the tenant wants to change the contract at any point through the tenancy. That is, however, capped at £50, including VAT. So if the tenant wants to add their partner at any point throughout the duration of the tenancy and you therefore need to make a contract change, you can levy a fee. This is landlords as well, let-only landlords. If you do, renewals or change of contracts yourself, you can levy a fee. It must be including VAT. Novation of contracts, so anything at all whereby they want the contract changing. It may be that they moved into the property at the start of tenancy without any pets and you've allowed them a pet. Change of contract, charge them a fee. You've got to start being ruthless. There's so many good landlords out there that don't put tenants' rents up, that don't want to, take advantage of tenants, but the law is forcing our hands to act a bit more smartly and to behave in a slightly different manner that we did before. When I did a portfolio review of all of the properties that we manage locally, some of my landlords had not increased their rent for 15 years and it had got the same tenant in there, But they were just happy because the tenant was happy, they were happy, they're not greedy. This myth that you landlords are just greedy and you just want to rip tenants off, this is what they're portraying to the government. This is what Shelter believe, that you're just all scrupulous rich people that can afford to have all of these things thrown at you. In reality, that is not the situation. Many landlords actually are accidental landlords and only a landlord because of circumstance. And this is just really, really unfair. Deposit replacement schemes are permitted in replacement of the traditional security deposit, but only if they're optional. And again, I spoke about this at the last seminar, but I've taken it out because I didn't know how many people were going to be in the room. But if anyone wants to know about deposit replacement schemes, they are a good alternative to a monetary deposit for landlords because they actually can give you up to 12 weeks cover rather than the 5 weeks monetary. So if you've got any questions about that or want to know more, come and see me in the break. And insurances, we used to make it mandatory that tenants took out tenants insurance to cover your liability of your belongings, your fixtures, your fittings, and so forth. That is no longer allowed anymore. We can only recommend. We can't make it enforceable.